That's what you do. All right. Now today, look at the rundown of the Civil War, 1850 Compromise,
Good stuff.
Fugitive Slave Act, Underground Railroad, the Nat Turner Rebellion, the Gadsden Purchase, Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Know Nothing Party, and Dred Scott versus Sanford. Questions, any of those? Yes, sir.
On that 1850 compromise, I was listening to it. The part, I think the second one about the area where Mexico slavery prohibited there.
Yeah.
But also, there was another portion that was talking about when the remaining territory was what was Utah territory. Was Utah territory?
Yeah, the Mexican cession basically split into three parts. The part given by Mexico. Well, you have the New Mexico territory in the south, Utah territory in the north, and California. The New Mexico territory included basically what is now New Mexico and Arizona. The Utah territory included what is now Colorado, Utah, and Nevada.
When you say slavery was prohibited in Washington, D.C., but not across the borders, I mean outside of Washington, D.C., say?
Yeah, I can get that in a minute. Slavery was legal in Washington, D.C. at this time period. Remember that Washington, D.C. is surrounded by two slave states, Maryland and Virginia. And you have a lot of congressmen coming from the north to Washington, and this is Washington, D.C. is supposed to be the capital of the freest nation on earth, the symbol of freedom, liberty around the world, but slavery is practiced. And for some of these congressmen, this is the first time they'd ever seen slavery.
Well, I recognize it.
Yeah, and and so they thought slavery should not exist here in the nation's capital because of what America represents. That was a huge controversy, but they eventually, through the 1850 compromise, it's going to be a compromise on it. Say, okay, slavery can still exist, but you cannot sell slaves back and forth across the district lines. Basically, they try to start it. Basically, limit it in some way. And does everyone have a copy of what was handed out to me today on the 1850 compromise?
Yes.
Okay, very important. Here's what's happening. All this is coming down to a whole bunch of issues surrounding slavery coming to the fore all at once, threatening to tear apart the Union 10 years before the Civil War actually happens. Now, the 1820 Compromise, this Missouri Compromise, was built on the idea of balance. But because of manifest destiny, the United States taking up that huge chunk of what is now the modern Southwest. Say for Mexico, put it in terms for them, they lost a third of their territory in 12 years to the United States. Texas and the whole area of New Mexico out to California. Huge chunk of their territory. United States, believing that we're destined to expand from sea to shining sea. It's great, it's wonderful, but there's a cost to it. Not just the physical cost, but the elephant in the room. The one thing they're trying not to talk about, and have been talking about since 1820, which is slavery. Remember, the Civil War is going to come down to one thing. Slavery. Any kind of peripheral issue is going to be related to slavery. The tariff is an issue for the South because their economy is tied to slavery, and that increases their costs. States' rights argument, the only right the seceding states were interested in was, can they have slaves or not? Now question, how do we know this? Because this is what they said. It's coming directly from their words. Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia all seceded. They said it was because of one reason, slavery. Now, the world of 1850 is completely different from 2015. Race relations, completely different. People really believed in white supremacy. People believed that one race was better than another.
Yeah. I'll be surprised.
Even though they are also mixed with other races?
Yeah. Actually, I could explain it to you this way. Comedian civil rights activist Dick Gregory once explained the difference between slavery in the North, racism in the North and racism in the South. So in the 1960s, said, in the North, they don't care how big you get, as long as you don't get too close. South, they don't care how close you get, as long as you don't get too big. Basically, proximity and relationship. In the North, there was racism, but it's practiced in a very different way. It's basically just races try to stay as far away from each other as possible. In the South, it's a relationship. It's institutionalized. You will see white children with black nannies and servants all the time. The difference is slaves, African Americans are always in a subservient role. One of the ironic things is the largest population of free blacks in the country is in the South. But these states have laws saying that they can expel free blacks anytime they want to. Basically, as long as they don't make trouble. It is raise questions about how white things are. They can stay.
Go back to what you said on Monday about resistant change. You know, a lot of questions were asked that you would probably promote change, but they want things to stay the same.
Exactly. They want things to stay the same. They're saying things that would shock a Ku Klux Klansman today, but it's the way things work. It's going to take a long time to get from that point then to where we are today.
Wise men say sometimes change is good, sometimes it's harmful.
Change can be good, change can be bad, but change is the constant of the universe. So look at the classroom we have today. Mixed race, co-ed, something would not have existed 40 years ago.
I'm sorry. Isn't that something what President Kennedy said, that change is the law of life? Hey.
So change is the only constant in the universe. Fact, even 20, 30 years ago, still would have been a scandal for a mixed race couple to be walking down the street here in Arkansas.
Oh, yeah.
So it's still a problem in some families.
Oh, yeah.
But the world was changing then, the world is changing now. And the question, though, is, are you going to accept that change, be a part of that change, even take a lead in that change, help direct that change? Because the way things are not the way things are ever going to stay. So in the next 20 years, you're going to be surprised by how different the world's going to be.
Yeah.
The question is, are you going to be a part of that change, not make the world a better place, or are you going to be fighting it tooth and nail and wondering what happened to your life? In 1850, they recognized the world is changing, but recognize that there are going to be problems with that change. Change does not come with problems. Growth is a struggle. But you have a whole part of the country that doesn't want to change, doesn't want to grow.
Kind of like Sheldon Cooper.
I'm not crazy, my parents had me tested.
I
love that joke.
He says he's crazy, and yet he still says he is crazy. He doesn't know it.
Oh, yeah. So, comes down to this man, Henry Clay,
Yeah.
called the Great Pacificator. Compromise. Man could always seem to be able to pull a winning vote or compromise out of his hat. Just
great precipitator, you say?
Pacificator, yeah. Basically able to calm things down. Whig from the state of Kentucky. Slave owner himself, as a prominent cousin who is a cousin is a prominent abolitionist, a man named Cassius Clay. Boxing fans would know that was the Muhammad Ali's given birth name.
Right.
So Clay's job is, here he sees the country fraying apart because all his territory gained from Mexico has thrown the country into imbalance. How do you restore this balance? Several questions all at once. Slaves freeing to the north in droves. Slavery existing in Washington, D.C. What's going to happen to all this territory brought in from Mexico? And big issue, Texas. Our Texas border was all the way down to the Rio Grande. Take a look here at page 454. Now, New Mexico, at this point just limited basically to the Albuquerque and Santa Fe area, they didn't want to be part of Texas, but Texas is claiming it. Texas could never try to make that claim stick, but now that they're part of the United States, they're saying they're bringing New Mexico into Texas. New Mexico doesn't want to, so they're trying to organize a territorial government free from Texas and free of slavery. That whole area that the U.S. just annexed, slavery had been abolished already. Well, Texas is getting ready to send troops to New Mexico to force its claim, bring them back into the fold. New Mexico is preparing to resist. So it's coming down to what is President Zachary Taylor going to do? He's a Southerner. He's a slave owner. They're expecting he's going to back Texas, but he says no. New Mexico wants it to be its own separate state. Let it be its own separate state. Which really surprised a lot of Southerners. But the country is getting ready to split apart over this issue. South's lining up behind Texas. South's fear is if they can dismember Texas, then they can do that to any other southern states. Because slavery exists because of geography. Look where slavery is and is not in the South. I have to go back here a few pages. Anyway, there was in one of these chapters there is a neat little graphic showing where slavery is concentrated, but slavery exists in the tideland areas that is near the coast, on the plains, but does not exist in the mountains. In Arkansas, slavery is in the south and the east. The area south of Little Rock and east under the Delta. Mississippi, it's pretty much all Delta, so everywhere slavery. In Louisiana, all over the state. But look at states like Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia. Slavery does not exist in the Appalachian Mountains because you can't grow rice on a mountaintop. Cotton cannot grow in that environment. Sugarcane especially not. All those labor-intensive crops that slavery depends on. So you don't have slaves in those areas. And especially, you're not have slavery in the desert, especially not the way it's being practiced in 1850. How many rice paddies have you seen in Nevada lately? Not a lot. Because it cannot exist there, at least not with 1850s technology. Arizona's a big cotton producing state today, but that's because of modern irrigation techniques they didn't have in 1850. So some of these southern states, particularly like Virginia, having all sorts of problems with areas of their state that don't have slavery. I'm afraid they could be split apart and add to the number of free states. Essentially, for as the South sees it, divide and conquer. Now, the 1850 Compromise can involve all the great political minds of the mid-19th century: Sam Houston, Daniel Webster, John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, so many others. William Seward, Jefferson Davis, Stephen Douglas. So Clay comes forward with this 8-point proposal. There's one, admit California as a free state. They're ready to come in. Grew very rapidly because of the gold rush. California wants in as a free state. Second, organize the rest of the Mexican cession without restriction of slavery, that is, popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty. We'll pretend that's popular sovereignty. 3, deny Texas its claim on New Mexico. Postal abbreviation. Basically, redraw the borders of Texas. Compensate Texas for this by assuming its old national debt back when it was a free country. Basically, pay them for it. As for the slavery issue, slavery will continue in Washington, D.C. But 6, slave trade banned across the borders. Seven, a stronger Fugitive Slave Act. And 8, deny congressional authority to interfere with the interstate slave trade, even though the Constitution gives Congress that power. It's the Interstate Commerce Clause. That is, they're going to try to avoid having to make the hard decisions. Essentially, they're going to disavow it, wash their hands of it, and walk away. Basically, an 8-point package to deal with one large bill to deal with all the issues surrounding slavery. Settle the issue once and for all. Now, here's the problem: is yes, some people like parts of this bill but hate others. North and South alike. So the proposal's faltering in Congress. The whole thing's about to fall apart when Stephen Douglas, senator from Illinois, decides to take it, break the bill down into several smaller bills, one organized support for each. So now he could get majorities for each of these, but different majorities from different congressmen. So here's how it materializes. Got the Texas-New Mexico Act. Let's create this territory of New Mexico, encompassing the whole southern half of the Mexican cession. And open to popular sovereignty, that is, the voters are going to decide the slavery issue. Texas will be given its modern boundaries to facilitate the creation of territories. And Texas will be given $10 million in bonds to be able to pay off its national debt. So basically, that's how Texas gets its modern shape. Is there's a series of compromises. There are about half a dozen different proposals for Texas' western boundary. So it has this really kind of bizarre shape it does today. One that nobody can ever draw.
Look like a foreshadowing.
Second, the Utah Act. You got the southern half of the Mexican section, now you have the northern half. This includes Colorado, Nevada, and Utah itself, modern borders, get open to popular sovereignty. Slavery would continue in the District of Columbia, trade being banned across the borders. And you have a new Fugitive Slave Act. California be submitted separately as a free state. Now, there have been Fugitive Slave Acts in place since the 1790s, basically authorizing the recapture and repatriation of escaped slaves. But still, there were thousands of slaves escaping to the north. Now, for the South, because they put a monetary value on these people, that means the loss of millions upon millions of dollars. This is when millions of dollars really meant something. And so the Fugitive Slave Act, which is going to become the most contentious part of the Act as years go on, mandated that private citizens assist in the capture of escaped slaves, provided jail terms and fines for harboring escaped slaves. That basically, U.S. Marshal can say, you're going to help me find this slave. They must assist. And what's worse still, suspected slaves to be taken into custody and hauled back to the South without a hearing.
But they're considered property.
Yeah, because they were considered property.
Yeah.
But this is a problem because some guy just walks in off the street here into Ohio or Illinois or somewhere, where you have a man who's been living in this state, a free man his whole life, and says, you match the description of an escaped slave from Georgia or wherever. You're coming with me. Even though everybody knows this is a free man, the guy literally could just walk in, grab this guy, and haul him back to the South. And that did happen. Essentially, legalized kidnapping.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of cases of people being grabbed and pulled to the South this way because they could not testify on their own behalf. Others could testify on their behalves, but not the suspect. There's another kicker of this law. Blacks could not testify against whites. Clay is 73 years old at this point. This is going to be his last hurrah. He's got a great triumvirate of Clay, Webster, and Calhoun, three of the great politicians of the mid-19th century. They're all going to be dead within 2 years. Well, the problem was getting people to agree to this. Like say, Clay argued with his dying strength for the wishes of California to be accepted, to be admitted as a free state. For the free soilers, that is those wanting to stop the expansion of slavery, he points to geography of the Southwest. So You have got what's more than 1,000 Wilmot provisos. You have nature on your side. So slavery just could not exist in that region because of the climate, because of the geography. For the Southerners, they had accomplished none of their goals by secession. Secession would inevitably bring war. Daniel Webster spoke in favor of saying, secession, peaceful secession, sir, your eyes and mine are never destined to see that miracle. They're desperate to stop a war here. Even though that means 4 million people are going to stay in slavery. That is what has abolitionists up in arms all over the North. But what about all these people? You stopped a war, but these people are still being held in bondage. And even for a lot of abolitionist congressmen, this is a price they're willing to pay to stop civil war. Civil war, at this point, an uncertain outcome. But what they've done is they stopped the war. Well, the Whigs are splitting apart as President Taylor, the head of the Whig Party, horrifies the Southern supporters by saying he supported a separate New Mexico statehood, and he opposed this entire compromise. So no matter what they did in Congress, because the President's going to veto it, it's all going to fall apart. Well, that situation changes very rapidly in July. July 4th, 1850, Independence Day, President Taylor's attending a rally in Washington, D.C. For the preserving the Union. Well, Washington, D.C., summertime, very, very hot. Apparently Taylor overdoes it, goes back to the White House to lie down, and just never really recovers. 5 days later, he's dead. So the president's now dead. The timing, though, is very suspicious. Led to some people concluding that years later that maybe he was poisoned, maybe he was assassinated. They did a autopsy about the 1990s, examined the body, commissioned the family, so found that that wasn't the case. Died of natural causes, just heat stroke. But now, the whole compromise is in the hands of this man here on page 449. Mr. Excitement himself, Millard Fillmore. He's a Northerner. He's from New York. So everyone's assuming he's going to oppose this because still so much support for slavery is. And Fillmore surprises Southerners by saying he supports the compromise. So, between Douglas and Clay, they heard it through the House and the Senate, passes, and the last portion of the compromise passes on September 17, 1850. Fillmore signs it into law 3 days later. The outcome is largely welcomed with a sense of relief. Fillmore pronounces it a final settlement on the issue that many had doubts would hold. So, the country avoids war. But look what's happening here in the country in the meantime. In the 1850s, the Southwest can open up rapidly. Once cleared of Native American tribes, they have rich tracts of land up to 640 acres, going for as little as $2 an acre. Cotton prices soar in the 1830s. Planters bought as much land as many slaves as possible. Like say in the deep South, areas like Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, you have plantations generally larger than those on the seaboard. The problem is, though, here in the deep South is a hot and very harsh climate. So we've grown up in an age of air conditioning, so we don't realize. So we take for granted that on a hot summer day we can just go inside and enjoy the cool air. But in this time period, you had no air conditioning, you had to work out in the hot sun. And you have no relief from it. I know some of these old houses around town, built like the 20s and 30s, they have these large front porches, a lot of them screened in. Because until air conditioning came by the 1950s and 60s, you slept on your front porch at night. Some people slept in their backyards. It's just too hot in the house. This is an agricultural economy, so people are working outside all the time. That's why the South kind of got a reputation is people try not to get too worked up because you don't get overheated. Slow down, talk slow, work slow, everything's slow.
Yeah, sometimes too much of anything is bad for you.
But of course, you have so many people living in farming and everything, working outside, that there's this real class difference between the upper classes and the lower classes. So the upper classes have people doing all the work for them. They can just sit on the front porch all day, sit and mint juleps, and tell everybody else what to do. The lower classes, the working classes, you got to work for a living. You tend your own farm, your own land, whether you rent it or own it, but you're doing all the work yourself. So lower class whites, because they're working outside all the time, sunburned necks, get the term redneck. Redneck was meant as a slur. It was an insult. It's still an insult. But that was the difference between upper classes and lower classes in the South. But again, the question, you've got the upper classes who are few in number, they have all the money, basically telling everybody else what to do. What in these, the rest of the South, the lower classes, the working classes, they're kind of being pushed around, being told what to do. They're not ever going to own slaves. They're never going to, but they see their whole society living without schools, without roads, any of the conveniences that are starting to emerge in the 1840s and 1850s. Why do they put up with it? The South has fallen behind the rest of the country. Why do they keep supporting these people, keep pushing more and more slavery, more and more radical positions? The answer, the idea of upward mobility. That one day that while they may not have slaves, one day they might. And plus, while they may be on the bottom right now, slavery does give them one thing. Somebody to look down on.
Have that feel of power.
Even though they are completely powerless, it gives them a sense of power. They could exercise their power if they wanted to, but they don't. So while they have nothing else, they do have that idea. So the question, why do people vote against their economic interests? Because people are giving somebody to look down on.
Yeah, it reminds me of an old saying I once read in some scholarly journals of some individuals in the past who supported fear as a way to control people. And I quote, "Caution is nothing without a sense of charisma. If a man plays as a hero, then it's only fools who'll persuade. But if he appears to be a devil, then no one will betray you."
Interesting point. It is, you have fear. Fearing change, fearing the unknown, claiming that one sense of power they do have. 1827, abolitionist Benjamin Lundy counted 106 emancipation societies with more than 5,000 members, all in the slave states. There were only 24 such societies in the free states. See, as the abolitionist society movement emerges, it's mostly in the South, because that's where slavery is. The North Carolina Manumission Society held meetings as late as 1834. But social pressures in the South increased in the 1830s and 40s against Southern abolitionists. Many were threatened to keep silent, others assaulted, others forced to leave the South. But even though you have this abolitionist movement is growing in the North, being forced down the South, African Americans actually rarely play a prominent role. You have a lot of people in the North, whites, who believe slavery is wrong, but they didn't necessarily believe the races were equal. White leaders were often patronizing, expected African Americans to take a back seat to the movement. But escapees, though, proved to be valuable assets to the abolitionist movement. Women, speakers as Sojourner Truth, a self-taught preacher, who was very popular in the abolitionist circuit. Escaped slaves, prominent figures like William Wells Brown and Frederick Douglass. Douglass was probably one of the most famous abolitionists and civil rights proponents during this time period. A lot of escapees escaped on their own, but others had help of the Underground Railroad.
It wasn't a literal railroad.
Yeah.
But indeed,
I will tell you a
but
couple
they
stories in a
did
minute
use
on
their
that. But basically, it's just a nickname. There have been indications of a network helping slaves escape to the North as early as the 1790s. But by the 1830s and 40s, it's kind of solidifying a little bit. But basically, they're speaking in code to basically avoid any kind of trouble. Because remember, what they're doing here, escaping slaves escape, is highly illegal.
Well, I guess that hence is the name underground.
Yeah. It's not actually underground, it's not a subway. Levi Coffin is believed to have been the leader of it. Quaker, originally from North Carolina, moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. But understandably, not a lot of records are being kept here. You have systems of safe houses and landmarks helping slaves escape to the North. Like I say, safe house is called a depot. Somebody leading slaves out of slavery was called a conductor. Then you have all sorts of people helping slaves escape here and there. You have whites keeping escaping slaves quietly in a safe room, a basement, or in a barn somewhere until it was safe. Because remember, in the South, because they know slaves are escaping, they have slave patrols organized on a county level. Basically, young men be drafted into these slave patrols. Basically, you'd have to ride up and down the back roads and everything, trying to see if any slaves were escaping. See if anybody did find an escaping slave, see if they had a pass or not, permission to be off the plantation or not. Slaves sometimes would be given permission to leave the plantation for an errand or to go to church, but not always. There's a great deal of spontaneity in the system. You have sometimes slaves would hide escaping slaves on the plantation, on another plantation. If a slave patrol was near, sometimes the slaves working the fields would sing songs to help slaves escape, escaping. The spirituals, which became a very popular church hymns in the late 19th or 20th century. It's based on songs helping slaves escape, telling them what to avoid, what river to find, basically head north. Sometimes even on some quilts, you had basically maps sewn onto them that would find their way through. So Harriet Tubman is probably one of the most famous of the conductors. She escaped from the slavery. Small, wiry little woman. She went back to the South 19 times and helped 300 slaves escape. To survive for the Union Army during the Civil War.
Does that number also include her own family as well?
Yes. There were some conductors that helped more slaves escape her, but they were captured on a couple different occasions. One man captured like 500 slaves. 500 slaves escaped, but he was captured himself, thrown in jail in Kentucky before he eventually escaped himself.
Mm-hmm.
There were no actual railroads, basically people doing this walking at night. But there was one case in which a actual railroad was used. This is the case of a man called Box Brown.
Yeah, that's what they call it. Have a box.
He was a slave living in Baltimore, Maryland. So he's tired of slavery, so one day basically loads himself into a crate that's loaded onto a train and is mailed to a prominent abolitionist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, just a short train ride away. The guy has no idea. The abolitionist has this crate delivered to him. No idea what it is. Opens it up, and out pops Fox Brown, now a free man. He mailed himself to freedom. It's like late 1840s that happened.
Yeah, that's, I don't know what's in his face. The guy just pops out. I've been in there for I don't know how long.
Yeah. Actually, there's a lot of risk behind this. Remember, if a slave was caught escaping, they could be beaten or killed. You may have heard the term hobbling before. Basically, they'd take your foot, cut the top part of it off, keep you from running again. There's also an entire industry called slave breakers. Those were people who were designed basically to come in, beat and torture disobedient slaves.
To the point that they do whatever the heck you say as long as you don't touch them.
Exactly. The slave prices would vary depending on the area. You had a field hand be worth $300 to $400 in the 1790s. The 1850s, maybe $1,500 to $2,000. That's a big investment. Then they had some kind of specialized skills to be worth even more. As being a blacksmith, carpenter, something like that. But understand, it's illegal to teach a slave to read and write. Because the slave owners don't want their slaves being learning where to go, what to do to escape, especially realizing just how bad they really have it.
It's kind of like the Hebrew slaves from Egypt.
Yeah, in a way. In fact, that was a model that really attracted the African American community. Slave owners more and more encouraged slaves to go to church because in the South the church is teaching obedience. Slaves obey thy masters. Slavery is biblically ordained. But the slave community, in fact, slaves and free blacks are often formed their own churches, which became the heart of the African American community. Even to this day, the church is the heart of the African American community because that was always the one institution that blacks could always control. One institution that was always theirs and didn't have to answer to anybody else. Well, in these churches, they're taught the idea of stories of slaves. That one day God would lead them into the promised land. One day they would be delivered. And that idea was very powerful and gave the African American community hope. At a time where they didn't have a lot. Now, there are a lot of northern preachers preaching that slavery is a sin. It's an abomination. It must be wiped out. A lot of churches end up splitting over that issue in the 1840s and 1850s. So the Quakers were outspoken abolitionists. The Methodists were outspoken abolitionists. But the churches are going to split north and south over this issue. For a while you have a Southern Methodist church, but eventually it's brought back into the regular United Methodist Church. Split between the Baptists and the Southern Baptists was over slavery in the 1840s. Now, of course, Southern Baptist Convention doesn't condone slavery today, but they did in the 1840s. Split between the Presbyterians, Northern and Southern Presbyterians. Those are the three main religions in the South in the 1840s and 1850s. Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians. And there were slave rebellions, large and small. We talked about the Denmark-Vassy Revolt in 1822. One South Carolina slave trying to organize a rebellion, but it fizzles out. But there's one case that actually came to fruition. 1831, Nat Turner, slave in Virginia, evangelist, inspired his fellow slaves to rise up to kill all, and to free all the slaves in Virginia. One a day, Turner and his men rose up, killed their owners, led the slaves down the road, picking up more slaves and killing other whites along the way.
Regardless if they were slaveholders or not?
Exactly. They stood in their way, they're going to get killed. They're tired, they want to be free. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. 55 whites are killed in southern Virginia over several days. But it faltered quickly as many slaves were fearful of execution. They refused to join Turner. White militias were organized and violently put down the rebellion, killing as many of Turner's men as possible and even killing slaves uninvolved in the rebellion in fear that they might be involved somehow. 17 slaves were hanged and 7 others deported. This Nat Turner Rebellion. What happened was it led to greater antagonism in the South against abolitionist sentiments. There actually was a bill in Virginia in 1832 to try to end slavery in response to that Turner Rebellion, but it was defeated, and Virginia slaveholders became more and more radicalized as a result. They were going to defend slavery at all costs. But in the meantime, look at how slavery is lining up here. Okay, hand that here on. Looking at dates of emancipation in the United States. You can see here on page 454, you have a distinct line between North and South, between areas held in slavery and areas of freedom. See, slavery that existed in the North was slowly being phased out. The old Northwest Territories is the modern Midwest. Slavery never existed because of the Northwest Ordinance, 1787. Others by the Missouri Compromise. Iowa and Minnesota, slavery is banned in those states. Oregon, 1844, the territorial legislature banned slavery. It never really existed there, but there's still a couple holdouts in the North. 1846 in New Jersey. New Jersey decided they were going to end slavery there, but did it in a very unusual way. It freed the children of all slaves born after 1846 and ended slavery as it existed at that point. All existing slaves in New Jersey then become called apprentices, who could sue for their freedom if they were abused, and they could not be sold without written consent. By 1860, only 18 of these individuals remained in bondage. So slavery was effectively ended or being phased out in New Jersey. New Hampshire. In 1857, one of their legislators realized, slavery is still legal in this state. But slavery was such an afterthought in New Hampshire because in the 1800 census, there were only 8 slaves in the entire state, none at all in the 1810 and 1820 censuses. Slavery is effectively non-existent, but just to make sure, they passed a law in 1857 saying slavery was illegal in the state of New Hampshire. You're going to have other states and territories where it's going to be an issue. Kansas, Nebraska territories, District of Columbia. Actually, the states pretty much have the slavery issue settled within their states by this point. They're either going to be free states or slave states. But now, as the nation moves outward, fills in the remaining territories, the question is, what about these territories that are going to become states? What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be free or slave? And that is what's going to dominate so much of the issue over slavery in the 1850s, basically the numbers. Simply the numbers in Congress. Now, the free and slave states are going to be equal in number, or it's going to be a permanent imbalance, free states dominating the slave states. Or the slave states hope, slave states dominating the free states. The consequences for this over the long term, is to be very dramatic for the nation. So to this day, most African Americans in the country still live in the South, areas south of the Ohio River. Still have many areas, many individuals, race relations are still a problem. Because some people are taught from one generation to the next that to value people based on the color of their skin rather than content of their character. It is to make a blanket judgment against somebody because of how they looked rather than how they acted. Well, after 1850, people are desperate to try to put the slavery issue aside, just try to ignore it. To ignore the one thing that's dominating the entire conversation. Instead, they turn to another issue, immigration. Between 1845 and 1855, 3 million immigrants came to the United States. Give you a number here. In 1850 census, the total U.S. population was 20 million. So 3 million, 15%, basically about 1 out of every 6 people literally just got off the boat. That's not counting the people who had come into the country before this time period and the children of these immigrants. One thing you have to remember about American history is America is an immigrant country. Everybody in this country right now is either an immigrant or a descendant of immigrants. Every last one of them.
What's the issue then here?
It's us against them is the question.
Right. My goodness.
Question of do you have someone to look down on or not?
My goodness.
As you look at history, what happens whenever large numbers of immigrants come to the United States?
Weren't there any political cartoons which expressed those kind of notions?
Oh yeah, there were a lot. But what happens in the United States in history whenever large numbers of immigrants, refugees come into the country? Nothing. The immigrants come in, they settle down to a nice, comfortable life, go about their business. Portions of their culture are gradually absorbed into the larger American culture, and that's that. Now, typically, you might have about a quarter of immigrants going back to where they came from. That's just normal immigration patterns, but basically, in American history, immigrants have largely been absorbed into the larger structure of American society. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then do the comparison then as far as if we're saying with the immigrants coming in and everything, their culture's being absorbed. Was the issue with the African American community mainly because of commerce, because of they wanted to keep them in the issue or in the area of slavery for the purpose of making money off them? Because I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the issue of if 3 million people can come into the country, immigrants, and it's all good or it's fine, but you have the slaves that are here and it becomes an issue even through history. What's the issue?
For a lot of people, this is an issue, but the question is basically comes down to racism and bigotry. It's not a logical process. Doesn't have a logical answer.
Right.
Some people, because they've been told their whole lives that this one group is somehow less of a group, they're not as good as you are, subconsciously they start to believe this. It starts to affect their actions. Again, not a logical process. It's fear. It's hate.
But that's
Fear
always,
builds it.
I guess that's always been my question, is that if you're a human, even though they didn't consider you a human, what is the fear of a person coming in wanting to make a living and want to be accepted as an individual? And I understand that's an answer you won't have just totally.
Exactly.
And then you have immigrants that come to the country, that come in and do what they do, but still there's a major issue with just a class of people where to the point that we still want to suppress you and keep you in this area. That still doesn't register as far as logical. It doesn't make sense. Fear of what? That's my whole question that I've always asked. What are you so fearful of? Oh, I guess maybe, I'm sorry. I guess maybe I'll go back to maybe something you said earlier. It was the fear of the repercussion of what you got to the class of people. Still trying to figure that out to this day. What's the issue?
Actually, it's just not something that makes a lot of logical sense.
Yeah.
The answer really is just respect. Treat people with respect.
Okay.
A lot of people have never really understood that or really learned that. Let's show you what happens here in this case here. 3 million immigrants coming into the country, mostly coming from Ireland and Germany. Now, the Irish are fleeing the potato famine, which left more than 1 million dead in Ireland from starvation. 2 million more left the entire country by the late 1840s. And we have still more streaming out of Ireland after that, mostly coming to Canada and the United States. Germany, a growing country, well, it's a series of countries, is looking for a newer and better opportunity here in the United States. But here's the thing, look at the Irish. When they come to the United States, because they're fleeing the potato famine, they have no money, they're dirt poor, they're a different religion from most of the rest of the United States.
Yeah.
Most of the rest of the Americans being evangelical Protestant, the Irish being Roman Catholic.
Right.
And some coming from the back country in the hills of Ireland, they don't speak English. They speak Gaelic. Most speak English, but not of them don't. And when they come to the United States, they're taking the most menial jobs, basically the lowest rung on the ladder. Any job they can take to feed, support their family. So what happens? Immediately they're hated. Because they are taking jobs at any wage, and employers will pay any wage to these workers to do that job, basically taking away higher wage jobs from Native Born Americans. So you have a lot of Native Born Americans fearing, okay, these strange people coming in from who knows where are going to take my job or force me to work a wage where I'm living in poverty the rest of my life.
That's what the cycle now with the Hispanic community.
Hispanics,
Well, I'm saying
refugees,
now, right now,
immigrants.
that's the issue nowadays. Right.
Also, them foreigners don't speak no English. Okay, they'll learn over time, but except, you ever heard immigrants talking to each other at Walmart or something, speaking in their native language? What are they talking about?
Never Asians.
Except they're talking about anything anybody else talks about. The day at work, problems with the kids, problems with the family, what's on sale, little kids begging for the toy. Because you have to understand about language is, English is a difficult language to learn. While most immigrants do speak it and they encourage their children to learn to speak it because that's the key to success in the United States. If you grow up speaking a certain language, it will basically be ingrained in your mind, in your very thought patterns. How you form words and ideas in your mind will be in that language. You will dream in that language. And so to go from one language to another, basically have to think what you're going to say, translate it, and then say it. Except it's a hard process to do if you're just learning language or just learned to speak it a few years ago. But eventually it gets to be second nature. But it's a hard process at first. So you basically train your mind to speak and think in a different language. So we've got the Irish coming in here. But also there's another problem in Ireland. The revolutionaries. They're in a constant state of rebellion against England. They are forcibly conquered by England. They've been staging bombings, demonstrations, riots against the English for generations. So what's the word we're looking for here? They're terrorists. Revolutionaries. They're going to come to the United States and tear this whole country apart. The fear among nativists is the Irish are going to make everyone Roman Catholic. They're going to make us all poor. and they're going to unleash a wave of terrorist attacks across the United States. Does any of this sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah.
What happened when the Irish came to the United States? Nothing. They're happy to have a new life. They settled in. Became part of the larger American culture. What's going to happen because the Syrians are coming to the United States in 2015? Same thing happened to the Irish. Nothing. Before World War II, there are waves of Jewish refugees coming in from Europe trying to escape the Nazis. Here's the same things are going to happen. What happened? Nothing.
Just fear that some of them coming over were actually Nazis themselves.
And of course, the thing is, Nazis wouldn't disguise themselves as Jews. Wouldn't think of that. Especially because they were about to take over the whole world anyway. And they had enough German spies and they had enough German sympathizers in the United States, they didn't need them.
Yeah.
But another issue behind that is, not train of thought here, but St. Patrick's Day. In Ireland, it is a religious holiday. Solemn church observances, family gatherings. It is the feast day for St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland. So when all these Irishmen are coming to the United States, they're still celebrating St. Patrick's Day, but observing it the same way. They decided, no, for the 1870s and 1880s, they're going to have St. Patrick's Day. There are going to be marches in the street saying, I'm proud to be an Irishman. They're tired of being forced to change their names because they're Irish, or seeing signs saying Irish need not apply. They march into the streets peacefully on St. Patrick's Day saying, I'm proud to be an Irishman. As marches continue toward this day in the East, New York and Boston, you have St. Patrick's Day parade. Today, St. Patrick's Day is a day where everybody's Irish.
Oh, yeah.
That's my birthday.
There you go. That's it. It became absorbed into the larger culture. So today, everything's St. Patrick's Day. They think bring beer and everybody's Irish. Go back to Ireland, it's still a religious holiday. But a few people in Dublin decided, okay, we'll organize parties for the American tourists coming to Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, but for everyone else, it's just a religious holiday. Well, nativism is increasing in the 1840s and 1850s. As people wanted to keep America for Americans, whatever that means. So parties in the 1852 election are trying to appeal to something, anything other than slavery, to keep their voters in the fold. Whigs are unable to make a case for their economic nationalism has been so successful for them. Democratic laissez-faire is working fairly well for the time being. But Protestant Whigs try to latch on the rising number of Catholic Irish immigrants as an issue to divide the electorate. They try to instill fear in the people that these people are going to destroy our church, destroy our country. So rally to the faith of Protestantism, and everything will be fine. So there's another issue here. Who are the immigrants voting for when they become citizens? Democrats. The Democratic Party has always been the party of immigrants. Immigrants always vote overwhelmingly Democratic. Now, the Whigs decide in 1852 they're going to go to the war hero again. This case hero of the War of 1812, the Mexican War, Winfield Scott. The Democrats go with Franklin Pierce. And here's the thing, Scott, who is an active Army officer, his daughter is being raised as Roman Catholic. He expressed some nativist sentiments, so basically he ended up alienating everybody. So Scott alienated the nativists who were anti-Catholic, and he alienates the immigrants and the Catholics who are mostly immigrants by uttering some nativist remarks. Basically, puts his foot in his mouth. Democratic nomination. The Democrats are going for as bland and boring as possible, and that is Franklin Pierce. Now, the man has a good resume, but he's just boring. Really, the man has a very tragic life. He had a great resume. He had been Speaker of the New Hampshire House, a young senator, former general in the War of 1812, but a horribly tragic life. He and his wife had 4 children. All of them died while still children. One of them died in a train accident right in front of Franklin Pierce and his wife. Like I say, his wife was in a deep depression mourning for the rest of her life. Pierce became an alcoholic. But in 1852, the Democrats are excited about Pierce. Their slogan is, if Polk you in 44, we'll Pierce you in 52. And Pierce won huge majorities in the South and edged out Scott most of the free states, winning 27 states altogether. So he gets 50.9% of the vote, 254 electoral votes. Scott gets 44.1%, 42 electoral votes. The Free Soil Party ticket, John P. Hale, that's no one you need to worry about, gets the rest, basically dividing the abolitionist vote against the conscience Whigs and the Free Soilers. He gets 5% of the vote. So it goes to Pierce easily. The Pierce administration was a disaster, though, for one of the worst presidencies in history. Like I say, his son died in a train wreck, or that last son died in a train wreck before his presidency began. The wife saw it as a sign of divine disapproval for his presidency. His vice president, William R. King, was dying when he was nominated vice president. Slaveholder from Alabama, dying of tuberculosis. So he went to Cuba for a while to try believing that the warm air would help heal his lungs. Didn't work. He was sworn into office in March 1853 in Cuba, the only president or vice president sworn in outside the country. Realizing he was dying, he asked to be returned to Alabama so he could die at home. King dies a month into his term as vice president. But still, the issues for the Pierce administration are going to be over slavery. That includes everything from the mission of Kansas, Nebraska, to the Underground Railroad, to even issues dealing with Cuba. We'll discuss more next time. So, read chapters 16 and 17 in your book. Are there any questions?
Sure.